Amazing Grace is a hymn that is, despite being centuries old, still well known in America. Whether you're religious or not, there's a good chance that you would recognize the tune because it's so ingrained in our culture's mind. When we think of this song, I'm sure many of us can hear the melody being played on bagpipes, as it is one of the most popular songs to be played on the woodwind instrument. However, the popularity of this tune goes beyond that instrument alone. Hymnary.org reveals that the song has been published in over 1,300 editions of hymnals since its original publication, and it is found in roughly 50% of all hymnals published today. So let's ask, what makes this song so amazing? I believe there to be two key factors that have propelled the song into greatness. The first being its background. The author of the lyrics was John Newton, who was born in 1725. Newton was an Anglican clergyman in a small English village named Olney. He befriended a well-known but often depressed poet in the village named William Cowper. Together, they wrote many hymns, and in 1779 they compiled a hymnal known as the Olney Hymns. According to the Psalter Hymnal Handbook by Brink and Pullman, the hymn book has profoundly influenced the later developments of English hymnody. Cowper managed to, despite his extreme bouts of depression, write 68 of the hymns, while Newton penned the other 280. The most notable of these hymns was Amazing Grace. The tune that is now sung with Newton's words is called New Britain, which was originally a folk tune. While the lyrics that Newton wrote were not set to the melody we associate with it until much later, we must go further back in time to understand their impact. You see, the words of Amazing Grace are not mere shallow platitudes. The Anglican clergyman didn't always find his vocation in the religious world. In his younger days, he followed in his father's footsteps as a sailor, and this eventually saw him take a job as a slave trader off the coast of Sierra Leone in Western Africa. His job was to buy and imprison slaves and then sell them on slave ships. For the next several years, he would work on various ships while participating in the transatlantic slave trade. On March 10th, 1748, everything began to change. In addition to being influenced by the widely popular The Imitation of Christ, Newton found himself caught in a storm while at sea. He prayed to God for mercy, and the storm died down. This was a turning point for Newton, who, while still working in the slave trade, would slowly begin to change his way of thinking about his life and vocation. Forced to quit his sailing career in 1754 due to poor health, he was ordained 10 years later in the Church of England. As the minister reflected on his life, his involvement in the transatlantic slave trade continued to bother him, so he took action. In 1787, he teamed up with the abolitionist William Wilberforce to create the Anti-Slavery Society. The next year, he wrote an account of his time as a slave trader, complete with a repentant confession regarding his involvement, which sold immensely well. Newton would also testify in Parliament about the issue. He died just 9 months after the slave trade was abolished in the British Empire. So, the story is a personal one. When Newton writes, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me, he's being genuine. Writing in his 1788 work, Thoughts upon the African Slave Trade, he says, I hope it will always be a subject of humiliating reflection to me that I was once an active instrument in a business at which my heart now shudders. One can see from the later part of his life that he was not only truly remorseful for his actions, but he worked to end the suffering that he greatly contributed to. This personal story in the background of the hymn has contributed to its popularity, as books and even a film have been made about some of the events in Newton's life. While none of us today were involved in the transatlantic slave trade, the great theme of the hymn still has an appealing one for people in the current era. That's the second factor that contributed to this song's legacy, a timeless theme. While grace is used repeatedly in the lyrics to emphasize what allowed Newton to be forgiven, the contrast between Newton's old and new life hints at another idea that the song presents: redemption. Consider these words that show how Newton was rescued from evil. I once was lost, but now am found. And Was blind, but now I see. And this oft forgotten stanza, the earth shall soon dissolve like snow, the sun forbear to shine, but God who called me here below will be forever mine. Consider the gravity of such words. Despite the world passing away, he still has favor with God. The message of redemption found in this song resonates with many as people today still seek forgiveness and redemption. It is a hopeful message as well, and it was surely something that Newton hoped to communicate with people as a minister. As he progressed into old age, Newton's memory began to fail him. At the age of 82, he said, "My memory is nearly gone, but I remember two things, that I am a great sinner, and that Christ is a great Savior." Truly, Newton saw himself as a recipient of amazing grace.